Okay, we're live. We're waiting a little bit for others to join, but welcome to the Digital Product Passport webinar, where we're gonna walk you through the basics of digital product passport and more, as well as provide you with practical guidelines of what to do with the DPPs and how to get started. Let's just give a couple more minutes for people to join, and we can begin.
Looks like there's an audio challenge, maybe? Oh, okay.
No, audio fine?
I guess people can hear now, so that sounds good.
Okay.
No pun intended.
It's fine. Nice. Okay, should we slowly get started? So welcome everyone to the Digital Product Passport, as already mentioned. The topic of today's webinar is how to turn compliance into a competitive advantage. And the agenda of the event is as follows. We're going to kick off the session with the first section of the webinar on the basics of the Digital Product Passport regulation, how it fits into overall Circular Economy Action Plan and ESPR regulation, how does it work, who are the stakeholders involved, who benefits from the DPPs, and why is it so important. This section is going to be covered by Kenny Arnold from Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Next, we'll learn more on one of the types of the DPPs, namely the EU Battery Passport, and its timelines, significance, stakeholders involved, what are the data requirements, and how it already changes batteries in the automotive sector. Going to be covered by Evert from Vinçotte, a recent Kiwa member. And finally, we're going to go deeper into the reasons why you should start with the DPP and how to actually do that, as in the practical framework to get started. That's going to be covered by me, a representative from Twintag. And last but not least, we're going to have a Q&A session. Here it's worth mentioning that throughout the webinar, please make sure you leave your questions in the section questions. And we're going to make sure to get back to the questions. And in case we're not going to be able to answer all of them, we're going to get back to you after the webinar. So let's get started. The first speaker is Kenny Arnold. Kenny is a designer and an advocate for the circular economy at Ellen MacArthur Foundation, a non-profit organization that creates evidence-based original research on the benefits of a circular economy. The stage is yours, Kenny.
Cool. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Natalia. So yeah, I work at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. As Natalia mentioned, we're a member-funded nonprofit, and so we're funded by some of the largest organizations in the world. And in that nonprofit status, what that really means is that they, provide some funding to us to do the research that we have, and we work with some of them on some key sustainability and circularity challenges. And so, in my role as senior manager of service design, I generally work on more technical related challenges. And so, when the topic of EV batteries came up, we started looking into it, and DPPs really emerged as kind of a key enabler for circularity. And what we really try to work on at the foundation is not really one product for one company or one company's problem. We actually try to work on topics that can uplift industries as a whole. And so we have an expertise on a range of topics. So I sit in what we call the circular design team, and where we work more closely with our partners, but we have topic and subject matter experts on food, finance, fashion, built environment, and we really advocate for circularity and provide that research to policymakers and business leaders, as well as doing a whole bunch of education I see that. Is there a question from Eugene? Can you see the presentation? Sorry. Yep. Okay, cool. Right, and so when we talk about the circular economy, what we're really talking about, in contrast, is to the linear economy, which is where we are predominantly today. And we really, when we say linear, we're talking about this take, make, waste model, which is we're extracting materials from the earth, mining them, harvesting them, we're transforming them into products and materials that get used by consumers in all kinds of topics and mediums. And when we are done with it, we discard it and it goes to landfill, or sometimes if lucky, it goes to recycling. But contrasting that is really this more circular approach, which may be not new to many of you on the call, but I'll explain it anyway, just so we're all on the same page. And so the circular economy approach is really talking about decoupling growth from an extractive model where possible. And so by design, we're trying to eliminate pollution, circulate materials as long as possible, and regenerate nature as along the way. When we say by design, what we're really talking about, because design is kind of this key lever in how the modern world has taken shape. Everything around us, for the most part, has been designed. Even if something hasn't been deliberately designed, it's kind of been designed by accident, right? And so those decisions that you make at that stage are really critical for how we have the experiences that we have as people in this modern society. And once that design is sort of established, it's baked in, it's hard to reverse it. And so design plays a really outsized role in enabling more circular experiences and products and services. And so when we talk about circular design, I thought maybe I would illustrate that with an example from a company called Algramo meaning by the gram. And it's really this product service system, because when we're talking about circularity and circular design, you can't just design a product and hope that it's circular. You need to think about the services that enable it and also the systems that exists within. So everything is working together. All those elements are leading up to the end result. And in the case of Algramo, they're trying to establish a refill model. And so this may look like a simple plastic bottle, but it's not, right? It's not only made from recycled plastic, which is kind of a baseline good thing. It also has an RFID label inside of it, so that when a user goes and refills this product, it's actually not only refilling the product, it's tied to an account that they have with Algramo, which has, when you have, and they started, I believe, in Argentina, and so that's why it's a Spanish screen here, but there's a service associated with this product, so that when a user refills their bottle, they don't have to just pay for the whole bottle, they can actually just refill like an ounce of it if they want, right? And so this system is flexible and allows reuse, and it also democratizes the price savings associated with bulk purchases for the most disadvantaged communities. And so those services really enable that. And finally, when they go to refill it, they stick that bottle in and it gets refilled, and they're just paying per use. But sort of when you think about these sequentially larger loops, it's also helpful to think about kind of, and maybe this is a diagram many of you have seen before, is different loops. When we talk about the circular economy, the smaller the loop, the better, right? The further the loop is, the more something has to travel, the greater the energy that's involved in part of it. And so on the left-hand side, we have sort of what we call the biological nutrients, and on the right-hand side, we have the technical nutrients. And so whenever you're designing a product, if it's like a car, for example, and you have metal and plastic and sort of fibers and things, the fibers have to be able to go back to nature and support that those ecosystems, and all those technical components need to be able to be repaired, reused, remanufactured, and finally maybe recycled, and also ideally using those renewables along the way. And what's maybe not seen here in between those loops is like the tracking and traceability that a digital product passport can unlock. And so a few years ago, or I guess 2 years ago now, the EU announced Eco Design for Sustainable Product Regulation, which is really kind of new standards for good design. And it builds on previously known as the Eco Design Directive, which now goes and expands from just energy-related products like appliances to really looking at more product attribute level, kind of the durability, reusability, upgradable aspects of things. And so what the ESPR really looked at is not only all products, but the products that have the biggest impact on the carbon footprint. So they looked at EV batteries and textiles, construction materials, and they prioritized those for kind of how to address circularity. And so what Esper also did is it introduced a digital product passport to sort of verify and validate those environmental benefits that we just mentioned. And so over the next several years, these different product categories, EV batteries being the first, will actually be kind of this trial run to see how we adopt and integrate digital product passports into their into companies' supply chains and value chains. And so in the next year or so, the final requirements for digital product passports are expected to be communicated, and exactly what data attributes are going to be included. We know that it will include carbon footprint and carbon accounting, environmental footprint, ethical labor, different aspects of that. And also, in addition to sort of some of the more static data, it will be able to include more dynamic data so that a product will be able to tell you how much remaining use of life is. And this is important because not only is it going to apply to products that are made in the EU, but for people like me that are in the US, this will also be impacting products that are imported into the EU. And so, but what exactly is a digital product passport? So it's a machine-readable digital document that's paired with a product. And ultimately that QR code. And so, by the way, fun fact, barcodes are going to be replaced by QR codes in the next few years. So every company is going to have to switch how tags and barcodes are going to be made. And so that actually is going to provide a really important foundational component for how companies are all going to start to be applying digital product passports. And so, I think I lost the presentation there briefly, but yes, thank you. And so the digital product passport is this digital record, and that data is going to be collected throughout a product's value chain from manufacturing to production. And so each stakeholder, as it goes through that assembly line, is going to be scanned. As it gets scanned, it gets updated with information around the components so that by the time for example, a battery gets to the OEM and the manufacturer, the mining company, the battery cell manufacturer, each of the players in the value chain has contributed a data piece that can inform the carbon footprint, for example, and the energy used to manufacture those parts. And so that's a little bit about what a digital product passport is, the future of barcodes, right? But this is a quote that I think is kind of illustrative from a colleague of mine on our measurement team, right? And he shares how DPPs are going to be able to really link CE measurements to a company's performance, right? And so it'll be able to, a company wants to measure how many of their assets are circular or what percentage of an asset has been reused or what the revenue is being associated with a product on that SKU or that ASIN. That's going to start to be possible and as companies start to adopt this technology. And then kind of going further a little bit into how a digital product passport works, right? It's this connection between touch points in a supply chain and a value chain. As I mentioned, they are a digital kind of record that's linked to a QR code. So as a product is produced, as it goes through that chain of custody, and that is documented at each stage, so that someone downstream actually has access to a ton of information around what went into making that product. And so that DPP also will be able to unlock different kind of like the estimated life remaining is an element here on the battery, because I believe they call it like a battery state of health. Well, that bit of information is critical for recyclers and collectors, so that a battery goes to reuse if it's possible, or if it has no secondary use, it can just be efficiently recycled. And so all of that history will be recorded in a digital product passport. And so kind of this is a quote I'd like to share from a colleague, someone I've met over the last couple of years, Sabira from Reaply. Reaply, if you don't know it, is an asset management platform, a reuse platform for office products and buildings. They are looking at expanding into everything to be reused. And so from their perspective, as a platform kind of marketplace, they need the data to be able to show brands and manufacturers what the residual value is of a product downstream, so they can best price it accordingly, and also demonstrate to upstream stakeholders how to maybe redesign a product so that the value is contained in a much more perpetuated way. And so, as I kind of mentioned, this is maybe more of to reiterate like why a DPP is important, right? We're at a moment in time where now companies are all going to have to really share and comply their supply chain data in a kind of a uniform way, which hasn't had to happen necessarily. Every company's been documenting and reporting in different ways over the years. There's obviously some standards how that happens, but the further back you go into your supply chain, tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it becomes more and more opaque. And so a DPP is really kind of being a tool to enable transparency. And that transparency is also going to be able to not just trickle down, but kind of be able to inform consumers downstream around like what is in that product and what it's made out of, which will allow new relationships to take forward. But digitization of products and packaging is also a critical step to establishing 100% recyclability, which ultimately is the goal, because enabling the accurate metrics of what's being collected is also going to be a key part that DPPs can unlock. And so here's a quote from a fellow I met recently from P&G on they work with digital watermarking, John DeBelder, and he says, in a world without digitization, we'll hardly be able to reach 45% of plastic packaging recycled rates, because even though with all the regulation and packaging and deposit schemes, you need that accountability, you need that traceability to enable accurate sorting, because when you have materials that have components that maybe are a little bit of PET mixed with polypropylene in the plastics market, if you can actually identify what those types of plastics are, you can send it to the next best recycling. And so now those technologies are actually being rolled out in different, I know at least in markets in Europe, to enable really high quality materials to be sorted out. So it's not just a mix of downcycled plastics, allowing us to segment and sort more high value materials. And so when you think about who benefits from DPPs, obviously, the further downstream you go, the more beneficial that is for organizations that are collecting and sorting, but also for businesses that want to enable new modes of resale, for example, or protecting their products from fraud and anti-counterfeit measures, which is also coincidentally where a lot of kind of this legacy technology came from, is DPPs, is that traceability, accountability was really being used to provide anti-counterfeit measures. But aside from that real-time asset valuation of like what is left in the usefulness of this battery, for example, going back to the automotive sector, it's going to hopefully really allow us to have much more transparent and efficient supply chains and allow much more finer understanding of the sustainability attributes that go into those products. So maybe to illustrate this a little bit better, and this is a diagram that comes from the Battery Pass, where they really looked at the different sort of stakeholders in that EV value chain around who's maybe benefiting from this in different ways, right? And so the gray line really symbolizing kind of the regulatory compliance that will be beneficial to the mining, refining, CAM and sort of cell producers of those EV batteries. But once you get into the manufacturers and the OEMs, they're able to have reliable ESG data. They're able to better understand all of the carbon footprints that go into that battery and passport, so they can start to differentiate their product in the market. They're able to then use that information to enable consumers to have more informed purchasing decisions, which right now is kind of subject to greenwashing claims, and it's a lot of it's voluntary. But this is going to, again, it's going to force companies to be compliant and to share. And so, traveling further downstream, you have secondhand users for stationary storage for batteries, example, or other reuse, or, I know I've heard in Ukraine, they're actually taking EV batteries and dismantling them, taking those cells, repurposing those cells into stationary storage and devices. So that information will be able to be far more useful to further folks downstream. And then as you get into the collection and the recycling, you're enabled more efficient recycling because you're not wasting residual value, and that's nothing's left on the table because you know what's in the battery, which right now is an expensive process because we don't know what's in the battery necessarily as things go downstream. So that's a little bit about DPPs. Thank you guys for listening to that. Hopefully that gives you a nice overview. And how does a DPP interrelate with LCA? I think we'll get that question in the Q&A. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kenny. We see your questions, so please keep them coming. Either one of our experts from Twintag or our expert speakers will be able to answer them in a written form, or we will discuss them live at the end of the webinar. And now I would like to introduce Evert Vermaut. is a team leader of sustainability services at Vinçotte, a recent member of Kiwa Group. Vinçotte is the largest player in the testing, inspection, and certification sector in Benelux region, providing objective advisory services in inspection, certification, conformity, assessment, and training. And Evert will walk us through the EU battery passports and how it changes the batteries in the automotive market. Please, Evert.
Yes, okay, thank you for the introduction, and also welcome from my side to this webinar. As stated already, I work for Vinçotte, and I'm a speaker in this webinar because we are currently working for some big car manufacturers who will be one of the first that will be have to comply with the battery regulation, and specifically with the EU battery passport requirements from that regulation. So what it's all about is that the battery regulation states that, let's say, large batteries, meaning electrical vehicle batteries, light means of transport batteries, like for e-bikes, e-scooters, rechargeable batteries with a capacity above 2 kilowatt hours will have to have a mandatory digital battery passport. And that is a mandatory requirement as from 2027. And what's specific, of course, to this passport, and what's the end goal is that it provides information to the battery to several stakeholders. We have the general public, so the end users of the battery, but also notified bodies that will be Vinçotte in the future, because we are actually in the process of becoming a notified body for that regulation, but also national authorities, so market surveillance authorities and European Commission will have to have access to information in that battery passport, as well as other persons, legal persons with a legitimate interest in that battery, meaning repairers, remanufacturers, reusers of the battery. But very specific in the regulation is that not all these stakeholders should have access to the same information. And that's more or less outlined here in the complex table I present here, is that on the left you have all the stakeholders which are mentioned in the regulation. Last row is the information that should be in the battery passport, and the green V's and the X's show which information should be readable by which stakeholder. So there's lots of information that has to be put into that battery passport, as you can see. And first of all, like information on the manufacturer, information on the carbon footprint of that battery, the recycled content, technical information like rated capacity, expected lifetime, but also a declaration of conformity has to be readable and accessible by all stakeholders in the EU from that battery. So that's to be accessible by all those stakeholders. But secondly, you also have test reports. So the manufacturer has to show that these batteries are compliant to the battery regulation. So there also information should be shared, but not with all stakeholders. The general public should not have access to test reports, of course, but for notified body, it's of utmost importance, because that's a proof that the battery is factually compliant with regulation. Other technical parameters, such as performance and durability, state of health, those have to be accessible by persons with legitimate interest, but not by other stakeholders. And then finally, last column on the right is that the detailed composition, dismantling information, safety measures should be accessible by Commission and by persons with legitimate interest, like indeed remanufacturers, reusers, repurposers of that battery. So that's the first challenge for the solution for this passport, that depending on the type of the stakeholder, they should or should not have to have access to information in that passport. And then secondly is that this battery has multiple life cycle stages. As you see in the battery status column here on the slide, so a battery is first put onto the market, that's the original status. Then when it is taken out of the market for second life, so repurposing or remanufacturing, you have also after that the waste stage, and then finally the battery is recycled. So what does the battery regulation state is that, of course, when the battery comes into the market, the economic operator placing the battery on the market, like the manufacturer, is responsible for making available the battery passport and putting all information in there, accurate information, completely and up to date. But when this battery, for instance, is taken out of an electric car and goes to second life, the company doing that, the economic operator doing that activity, has to create a new battery passport update information in there and link it to the original battery passport. When the battery becomes a waste, then their responsibility lies with the waste management operators or the producer's responsibility organization. And so they should, once again, update the battery passport with new information. And when the battery is becoming recycled, then the battery passport shall cease to exist. So the challenge here is that you have one battery passport or a second one linked to the first one, but several stakeholders here should be able to update and to adapt the information in the battery passport so that it's factual, up-to-date, and accurate. And on the right of the slide, also important that if one of these stakeholders ceases its activities or does not have any activity anymore in the EU, the battery passport should be still available. It cannot be disappeared, it cannot destroy, it should be still available for every end user or other stakeholder for that battery. So that's a second challenge here. That's updating of the battery passport through its entire life cycle. Then how can you have access to that battery passport? That will be the QR code. So as from 18th of February 2027, every battery shall have a QR code, which will link to the battery passport only for the light means of transport batteries, the industrial batteries, and electrical vehicle batteries. As mentioned on the slide, the QR code should be indeed easily legible, readable, should be able to be scanned with handheld communication devices, should comply to a specific number of standards, but very important is scanning this QR code should give you access to the battery passport. To be complete, there's also other batteries, of course, which are subject to the regulation. They don't all have to have a battery passport, but the QR code, as mentioned on the slide, for starting light emission batteries should link to specific information. So for the SLI batteries, which link to the recycled content in the battery, and for all other batteries, very specific information should be able to be accessible by scanning that QR code, but that's not defined in the regulation as being a battery passport. Good. As said, we are currently getting questions from mainly automotive sector, which will be impacted maybe the first of all sectors by this battery regulation. And so they see challenges there, but they also see opportunities. So what they see is that at present, the regulation clearly states what should be accessible or what information should be in the battery passport and what should be accessible by scanning the QR code. But companies also see an opportunity here. They want to also include other information digitally by scanning this QR code, like readable instructions of the battery and safety information, so that they don't have to separately publish that and make it available to the end users. It's also accessible by scanning the QR code. And then, of course, a little bit struggling into what safety information, for instance, they can put behind the QR code and what safety information they cannot put behind the QR code. Because, of course, extinguishing agents specifically for that battery, you don't want to start to try to put out a battery being on fire by first getting your smartphone, starting a scan, and then seeing which agent you should use for that. So there's also an equilibrium between what should be behind the QR code and what should be physically labeled on that battery. Another opportunity they see is that the regulation states that the battery should have a label, a physical label in there showing name of manufacturer, importer, and all other contact details. And this regulation states that this should be available in a language which can be easily understood by end users and market surveillance authorities. So what the automotive sector sees as an advantage is with this QR code, they can put a label onto the battery, use English language, for instance, to communicate the information, but with the QR code, they can automatically present to any user in another country, not English native speaking country, to present the information in the language of this user, wherever he is. So the QR code, you scan it, the cell phone knows where he's actually is present, and this information is automatically presented in the right language to this user scanning this QR code. Very specific, and I mentioned already that sometimes the information in the battery passport should be updated depending on the life cycle stage of the battery. But it even goes further than that, because as the regulation states, the information in the battery passport should be accurate, complete, and up to date. And that should also be information resulting from the use of that battery. And this information could be, for instance, charging and discharging cycles of the battery, negative events like accidents or operating environmental conditions, like temperature, state of charge of the battery. So the regulation states that this battery passport should have this information up to date in the battery passport. That means that whatever the battery management system of the battery is registering, like temperature, but also charge and discharge cycles, this information should be uploaded to the battery passport, so the battery passport is up to date. So the battery passport will be a very dynamic passport, which should currently always reflect the actual status of the battery. And of course, challenge here is that should be automated, this updating of the battery passport, and also manufacturers are wondering what is the definition of up to date. If you start the car, should then the battery passport be updated? So their discussions are ongoing on how frequently this battery passport should be updated to reflect the current status of the battery. Another problem that the car or the automotive industry is facing is they have sometimes quite long supply chains. I presented here visually in this graph. On the left, you have a battery being produced with a QR code on it. The battery is shipped and transported to an electrical vehicle assembly plant where the battery is being inputted in the vehicle. Then vehicle gets shipped to the port area. So in Belgium, for instance, it passes customs, and finally this battery in the car ends up with the dealership where the car is in fact sold. Now, the battery regulation is applicable when the battery is being placed on the EU market. Near car manufacturers face the problem that it could be that some batteries with the QR code are already shipped, and in a vehicle or not, shipped to the EU when this information, the battery passport, is not yet complete. So the QR code is in there, but the battery passport is not yet complete because they're still lacking data. They have to calculate the carbon footprint. They have to have that footprint verified by a notified body. So they are in need for a very, say, manageable system in which they can update this battery passport, even if this car is already being shipped to the country of destination where it finally will be sold. So there they really face the problem of having to have a very good management system to track all the documents or all information that has to be in the battery passport, and manage also the timing of putting the information in there. So when the car or the battery comes on the EU market, that are compliant with the regulation, all data are uploaded into the battery passport. Finally, another, and that's a really specific one, is that, as Kenny already mentioned, a big impact in the battery regulation is that every battery should have, every large battery, like for an electrical vehicle, should have a verified carbon footprint. And I've presented here a supply chain of a finished battery, quite simplified. Not every stage is in there, but as you might know already, also these supply chains can be complex, and you have several suppliers that supply parts of that battery to the final manufacturer putting the battery on the EU market. So the regulation states that it's the obligation of the manufacturer. He has to publish the carbon footprint when the battery is put on the EU market. The manufacturer has to calculate that and have that verified by a notified body. So that's the C3 here. But that manufacturer is dependent on information at its suppliers, because each supplier in that supply chain adds to the carbon footprint. And so that when we add all these partial carbon footprints, you will get the total carbon footprint of the battery. And so manufacturers are thinking about, let's say, a sort of section by section certification in which one supplier producing part of the battery makes his calculation of the carbon footprint, has that carbon footprint verified, places a QR code on that component, communicates that to the second supplier, C2. He does the same operation, calculates his part of the carbon footprint, adds that to the carbon footprint of supplier C1, and then also communicates that to the manufacturer, who does then all the information necessary to calculate the final carbon footprint of the battery and put it put it in the digital battery passport. So here also we see lots of questions being asked and challenges to be able to calculate the carbon footprint, seeing that the supply chains are quite complex, and many of the information for calculating that carbon footprint is considered confidential by some suppliers and is hard to get by the final manufacturer. So I hope I've managed to present some details of the battery regulation, the digital battery passport, and also some challenges that we hear from the automotive sector who have to put a QR code and have the battery passport implemented by 2027. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for you, Evert. It was a very input-dense presentation. But now we're moving to the third and final part of the webinar before we start answering your questions. And my name is Natalia. I'm a representative of Twintag. Maybe a side note of what Twintag is. We are a technology provider, and we power packages, products, and passports to connect digital relevant experience to them and make sure they are becoming smarter objects rather than just physical products. In today's discussion, we've already discussed what digital product passports are all about, what are the key requirements, how it sets in the whole idea of transforming towards a more circular economy in Europe. Then also Evert gave us a very good deep dive into battery passports, but now I want to look more into why do you even think of starting digital product passports today and how to do that. So if there's one key message I want you to take away from this part of the presentation is that the true value of the digital product passport lies beyond compliance. And what I mean by that, if we're looking at the digital product passport, yes, that's one of its kind circularity tool. Yes, there's still some uncertainty around what legislators wanted to look like at the end. And yes, tracing products back to the sourcing stage is quite complex and can be quite tedious. And on top of that, you see that so many stakeholders are involved in the process who are also looking at each other thinking, what part of data are we responsible for? So a lot of complicated details into this process. However, good part about it is that from the point of view of a product and technology providers, the technology around it is not really new. And all of the product information that you need to comply with the DPP in the first place already exists somewhere at your backend systems and is not maybe just put to good use. Now, when we're talking about compliance from technological point of view, it's actually a very simple process. All you need to do is you need to take each individual item from your production line, your products, and augment them with unique identifiers. Now, that's, in this case, easier said than done, because, well, how do you do that? That's the part for the next slides of the presentations. But why do you do that is a pretty straightforward question. Well, first, if you have a digital IDs, can be QR codes, can be RFIDs, doesn't really matter the type of data carrier you choose. But if you have them already placed on your products, you can interact directly with your users. By that, what we mean is that you can upload all the maintenance instructions, maintenance history, certain workflows, all of the product information onto the product for the customer to see. Reversely, in return, you get the feedback from your customers. And that means, well, ultimately, that means a better customer experience, customer retention, brand loyalty, and overall protected brand reputation. Next, the digital IDs on your product passport, they also extend the life cycle of the product, which is, well, as Kenny mentioned, this is one of these key pillars of circular economy. While on one side, obviously, that's what we want to see, and that's great. On manufacturer's side, that means less revenue coming from the product sales because less products are circulating in their production lines. So that means that they're looking for new revenue sources that would be more service-oriented and service-based. Here is where we see a lot of upsell opportunities directly on the product. We can see lots of companies already completely or partially moving to product as a service models and overall establishing business models that would make sure that they have this recurring revenue rather than just a stream of revenue coming from the sales of the product. And lastly, the IDs on your product, kind of digital product passports of your product, they allow you to save cost by implementing all of the re-processes. Here we're talking about the return of goods, the order or reorder of spare parts, and we're talking not just about compliance with the right to repair regulation, for instance, but actual repair of the products and reuse, and eventually a recycling, which is just the last resort if there's nothing to be done during this product lifecycle with a product. But what all of these processes imply is ultimately that you need an item level information and workflows that users that are interacting with the product can easily access. Now, there are already cases and real companies that see DPPs much broader than just compliance. Let's, for example, look at Tricorp Workwear. This is a Dutch company based in the Netherlands. They were facing 4 main challenges, and only 2 of them were regulatory oriented. So yes, they saw the digital product passports coming. They realized legislation is very important. We need to do something about it. They saw all of the requirements of the extended product responsibility policy. They also knew they need to take care of that. But at the same time, they already realized that if they're going to invest in the environment for the compliance without using it for anything else, they would be just a cost drain for them. So they realized that there's actually an opportunity for them to improve their return and repair flows, but also to get to kind of hold of their distribution channels and to understand their supply chain better. But also for a workwear and fashion brand, it's very important to stay closely connected to your customers. So they saw that this is actually potentially our best communication channel with our end users. And so what they did, they got rid of all of the unnecessary, this number of tags on the product, which get ripped off post-purchase anyways. They put a single woven unique QR code on their garments to consolidate all of the information and workflows that would be accessible to all of the stakeholders. That was essentially what they did. Sorry. What's happening? By the way, if you can scan it in the QR code in the left lower part of the screen. This is a fully functioning demo of the case we're talking about. It's already being put in place and used by Tricorp. So essentially, the result of this whole project, they got their garments to be more than just a clothing piece, but rather an asset. And they unlocked the opportunities like communicating with their customers directly, getting their feedback in return. They directly can upsell not only services, but related products of the product itself. They streamlined their return and repair processes, and they also got this platform which allows them to future-proof their further compliance, meaning that they can easily shift the content behind the tags in the backend systems to make sure it adapts to whatever requirements are posed by the either DPP regulation or can be anything else in, 3-5 years time. Now, okay, we've kind of established what are the reasons why you need to start with DPP now, but the more challenging question is actually how to do that and how to get a unique serialized tag on sometimes millions, billions of products in your production line. And that's the question that poses a lot of confusion. And we see a lot of manufacturers saying, okay, this is a question for our production team. Let's not touch it. Let's just under the carpet. And for example, in the case of Tricorp, how they did it, they wove these unique QR codes on their production facility in their garments. They were completely empty, which allowed for a very large scope of flexibility for this use case. Then before posting them for distribution, just a simple smartphone, it was not a specific scanner, just a smartphone on the assembly line, it was scanning the tag and linking it directly with all of the information which they had in their management system on each individual item. So, but this implementation process, it can really vary depending on the size of the company, depending on the product types, depending on how ready the company is for this kind of technical solutions. So here we worked out a framework, which for the purposes of this webinar is much more simplified, but we usually start with the scope as the first step. By the scope, we mean that here is where the company and the technology provider, Twintag in this case, they decide what is going to be the product types and specific products that are going to be covered in the project. What are the personas you want to cater to? What are the processes you're looking to optimize? What are the workflows you want to present? And what are the information parameters you want to mention? Because at the beginning, not all information is going to be necessary to be put out there. And this is where our main advice is to start small and scale later. Don't overburden yourself with trying to cover everything all at once. The second step is design. Here is where you kind of define what people scanning the tag are going to see and how they're going to be able to interact with this experience. So we're talking about the business logic, look and feel of the interface. Also, we're talking about, are you going to resort to more custom-made solution, or you're going to use templates, like in the case with Tricorp, for instance, where it's very easy to get up and running very fast. Also, here you decide, do you need integrations with the technology providers? Do you have something that they can link to, or this is going to be a completely standalone solution? Moving next to the deployment, this is where you choose your data carrier. This is where you choose where you're going to put the data carrier. You choose the onboarding type. By onboarding type, we mean, well, in the case of Tricorp, that was this woven QR codes that were empty at first and then were uploaded, filled in with data. That can be also done through pre-printing, like we did for ExxonMobil with their plastic granulates, for instance, or it can be done as a tag being put on the assembly line after. So it really is a flexible solution. It's only up to you and your business objectives to define the direction. And here's when you also define the production setup, all of the scanners you're going to use or the smartphones you're going to be using, etc. And then the most fun part is the scale step, is where you see how the solution works. You understand what worked, what didn't. You get the feedback, and that's where you scale. You involve more products, you involve more personas you cater to, you involve more parameters and processes. One quick mention that I wanted to include is that the process is pretty simplified, because we knew if we're going to go into details, we're not going to have enough time for that. But we have a webinar in 2 weeks coming up with our partner Katunasi, just on that, on the deployment process, on the whole pre-printing, post-printing, serialization type of solutions. I will make sure to leave the link in the comments. Should be fine now. Yes, here's a link to the webinar. Moving next. So the key takeaways of this webinar. Well, the first part Kenny covered was saying more or less the digital product passports are one of its kind circularity tools and are strategic assets for companies. Yes, there are a lot of open questions, but companies understand that they need to start taking proactive actions now. Then the second part covered by Evert was about battery passports that are already changing the future of batteries in the automotive sector. And finally, again, the key message of the third section was the digital product passports are much broader than just compliance. And I hope we've answered some of your questions, or maybe created even more questions, which is not that bad of a thing after all. So if you still have some questions, or you want to go really in depth into your use case and discuss it more in details with our experts, you can scan the QR code. Otherwise, I will also include the link to my colleague's Calendly, and you can just drop a line and have a chat and see where it goes from there. Okay, here it is. So I suggest we start answering the questions, no? Where do I begin? So, Mike, do you see the questions that are still not answered by our colleagues?
Yes, I think we've seen a lot of questions coming in. I think the team has already started to answer a lot of those. What I suggest, given there are a lot of questions coming in, that we will follow up with everybody on an individual answer, given that some of them are very technical, but we'll make sure that everybody has access to all of those answers. Because I don't think we can answer all of them during the session today.
Yeah.
So what I suggest is, like, if you still have a few questions, please drop them in the chat or in the questions section, and then we from the Twintag side and together with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and Vinçotte will make sure that you have an answer to all of those, and then share that together with the recording and the slides for of today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just one question I can see that I can already answer. How does this clothing use case deals with the EU regulation regarding label on clothes? The label must explain the composition of the fabric, include clear, legible text. Well, that's the thing with the Digital Product Passport regulation. Potentially all of the care instructions, all of the material compositions, all the sourcing of the materials, all the supply chain stakeholders can be all included in the DPP. So in one durable tag, like in the use case that was shown here. But it's going to depend on the legislators and them making a move and finalizing the requirements and what can and cannot be put behind the QR codes and what should be still readable on the labels. At the moment, I'm not aware of anything being finalized on that front. Pleasure. Okay.
In that case, let's wrap it up for today. Thank you everybody for attending. As said, we'll follow up with answers to your questions and share those as soon as possible. Thank you very much for today.
Thank you so much. Hopefully it was a relevant session for you, because that was the pure aim for us to provide the practical knowledge on the topic, which has a lot of open questions still. But yeah, as Mike said, we're going to make sure to get in touch with everyone on an individual basis, because really the questions are very relevant and very interesting. And we feel like we need to, it's worth raising awareness around the topic because it's for the good cause. So thank you very much, and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks.
Okay.